When you have a comic that runs for over 2 decades and is not really super accessible due to being out of print, a few misconceptions are bound to arise on the internet, and Archie Sonic the Hedgehog is no different. I've seen some confusion and misinformation being spread across the web when talking about this comic that I wanted to address in a small video. I did my best to think of the big misconceptions or talking points that I see crop up now and again, and while there are a few I'm sure I missed, I believe I've managed to wrangle up all the big ones. With that quick intro out of the way, let's get on to it. I thought it would be nice to start off with one of my personal pet peeves when it comes to people not understanding Archie Sonic, the idea that his name, and Sonic in general, is the ridiculous Ogilvy Maurice Wentworth Hedgehog. This has been pushed online as his real name through general discussion and seemingly given weight via a mention in YouTube videos with millions of views, such as Game Grumps. It makes sense, since it is comedic that a character as cool as Sonic the Hedgehog would have such a dorky real name that he's ashamed of, but I gotta ruin everyone's fun and say that his name isn't Ogilvy. The name Ogilvy seemingly came from notorious writer and artist Ken Penders. I say seemingly because I can't find any time he came out and said that this was Sonic's name on the web, save for this forum post from 2004 saying that Ken had mentioned it on one of his forums, and that also disproves it being in the comic. Sonic's first name in the book is left completely unknown, as in issue 53 of Archie Sonic, Sonic's dad Jules is about to say Sonic's first name before being stopped by Sonic, leaving it at that. In a character profile written and drawn by Ken, Sonic's full name is left unfinished, with his first name being listed as unknown. Wentworth, and I don't know how people got this, also came from issue 53, with Antoine just making it up to tease Sonic over his middle name being Maurice, which is actually a part of his real name, first showing up in the OG Archie Sonic miniseries as a one-panel gag, and later being canonized in issue 53, when Jules calls out to Sonic by his middle name, and Hedgehog is just Sonic's last name, as per usual. I'm not sure how this misconception was able to spread like wildfire for so long, but if one writer whom not that many people like says that's what his name is, it probably isn't canon to anything. Ogilvy is never mentioned in any issue of Archie Sonic. His first name is unknown, and the only true parts to it are Maurice and Hedgehog, with Sonic being the nickname he prefers. Actually, in the Archie Sonic Encyclopedia written by Ian Flynn, it said that Sonic had his name legally changed to just Sonic the Hedgehog, meaning that none of this stuff is even that relevant outside of the early days of the comic. Thank you, Papa Flynn. And keep in mind, it's only Archie Sonic where he's called Maurice. Everywhere else, it's just Sonic the Hedgehog, or Nicky. I don't know, I've never read any of the manga. Sonic Prime using the Maurice name was in a now-deleted Netflix description for the show, although I admittedly wish they kept it in because that one was funny. This is more so based on fandom shipping wars than anything, but do Sally and Amy hate each other in the Archie Sonic comics with their icky love triangles? They were the big two Sonic girls for the longest time, so it would make sense that they would be at odds, right? Not at all. Archie Sonic never had a single story where Sally and Amy were pitted against each other as bitter rivals. Moments where one might have been shown in a better light than the other, sure, but never any competition or disdain between the two. In fact, they were regularly depicted as both friends and teammates. The simple truth of the matter is that before Ian Flynn, most writers didn't really care too much about Amy to really bother showing her super negatively, only ever using her in a handful of issues and minor roles. The only true love triangle where two girls were pining for Sonic was between Sally and Mina Mongoose, and even that never got super nasty. Amy and Sally are simply teammates who like each other and get along just fine. No drama whatsoever. It's the fans who try to kill each other. Scourge the Hedgehog, one of the more famous characters from Archie Sonic, often has a mess of people credited with creating the character, often at times leading to people dismissing him outright because of a certain someone being associated with his creation. Let's get to the bottom of that. The character Evil Sonic, or Anti-Sonic, first appeared in Sonic issue 11, written by Ken Penders and Mike Kantorvich, with Dave Manick providing pencils. He was an evil Sonic from a mirror universe where good was bad and bad was good, going on to make a few other appearances in the comic, some very bad ones, before receiving a massive character overhaul in Sonic issue 160, written by Ian Flynn and penciled by Tracy Yardley. Here, Evil Sonic would receive a new look after a failed attempt at using the Master Emerald to turn super, now having green fur, blue eyes, and taking on the name Scourge, wishing to separate himself from the typical evil twin role. This new design would be created by longtime Archie Sonic artist Patrick Spaziante. Simply put, Evil Sonic became Scourge, but they're still the same character, meaning that he's still Ken and Mike's baby boy, but I find it a tad annoying whenever people try to downplays Scourge as a character out of mere association with Ken, just because he was a part of a particularly bad storyline that I'm not going to talk about. Go watch 8 Squid's video on it, it's pretty good. And overall, just acting like Ken left some major mark on the character. As someone who's read Archie Sonic quite a few times, let me tell you, Evil Sonic did not have that many appearances before issue 160. Ignoring issues depicting flashbacks or cameos, do you want to know how many appearances Evil Sonic had in the comic before becoming Scourge? 8. He had 8 actual appearances in the comic where he played a significant role, 6 written by Ken and 2 by Carl Bollers. Do you want to know how many issues Scourge had? 23, excluding cameos again, all of which were tied to major storylines and not just single one-shots, all of which moved the character forward, developing his personality and his motivations and fleshing him out as an interesting villain. Think of it like this: Stan Lee made Daredevil, but people don't think of Stan Lee's version of the character despite him making it. They think of Frank Miller's mark on the character and how that pushed the direction of Daredevil forward. And I think that's how people should treat Scourge and any other character made by Ken who appeared in stories written by other people. Just to recap, Ken, Mike, and Dave made Anti-Sonic, and Ian, Tracy, and Patrick turned Anti-Sonic into Scourge, the character people actually like. Alright, this one's a bit complicated, and I think people tend to get confused on it. Fiona Fox, a character from Archie Sonic, is often confused as being a robot, but that's not the case. When Fiona was a child, she had been held captive by Dr. Robotnik and was used as one of the first references for his auto-automaton robots, lifelike robots that were designed for infiltration. Robo-Fiona was sent out to an island to set a trap for Tails while he was out at sea, the young fox quickly developing feelings for the red fox, falling in love. Tails would defeat Robotnik and the Robo-Fiona after she became rusty due to the seawater, being left on the island to never be seen again. Years prior to this, the real Fiona would be left in one of Robotnik's prison, left on her own and being forced to escape without any help, growing up into a bitter teenager who hung around with Sonic and Co. before eventually joining Scourge as a villain. The robot Fiona we're first introduced to just looks like what Fiona looked like as a child, and the real one who hangs around with Scourge is a flesh and blood teenager. This one I think is rooted in the boogeymanning of Ken Penders, where people constantly bring him up and his shenanigans because it's funny to do so, along with 2 very public lawsuits involving him in the Sonic series. I believe this led to people believing that Ken had been on the book since the very beginning as the main creative for everything Archie Sonic, including characters and concepts. The truth is that Ken Penders got his writing start on the book with issue 11, almost a year after Archie had begun making Sonic comics. This isn't to say he didn't contribute a lot to the comic writing-wise, he absolutely did on various issues and storylines for Sonic and Knuckles, but to say that he was the only main writer on the book is stretching it quite a bit. Ken, and his writing partner Mike Kantorvich for some issues, was only one guy in a team of other on-again, off-again main writers, with Mike Gallagher writing a majority of the goofier stories before issue 50 and Carl Bollers acting as a main writer afterward up until the 2000s. After Knuckles had been introduced in the comic, Ken would mostly focus on that character and his world, usually just writing backup stories for Carl while he worked on the main Sonic book. Ken would leave Archie Sonic after issue 159, with his last credit on the book being as a letterer for issue 169. Speaking of Ken's other credits, let's talk about his art. Often online, people like to poke fun at the various bits of bad art found in Archie Sonic, usually between the late 90s and early 2000s, often dubbing these goofy-looking panels as the Ken Penders art style, under the assumption that he drew a lot of these himself. In actuality, Ken did very little penciling during his time on Archie Sonic, and it was exclusively for stories that he had written, often just short stories or backup stories with very few full issues drawn by him. Ken's art style is actually very easy to tell apart from other guys as well. In the early days, his stuff, while very flat, actually looked decently on model and was perfectly serviceable for short backup stories. Later on, his style would evolve into making characters extremely stiff, wide-eyed, and often giving them extremely bony limbs. It's very easy to tell what Ken drew when you look at a few of his panels. I understand that art is subjective, but the notion that Archie Sonic always had bad art before the late 2000s is also a bit of a stretch, and is mostly just true for the period after the Sonic Adventure adaptation in issue 159, with some good-looking issues in between. Early Archie Sonic was actually fairly consistent with its art quality, with talented guys such as Scott Shaw, Dave Manick for more comedic issues, and Art Mawani and Patrick Spaziante for more adventure-oriented stuff. Ken had most likely only done art for Archie Sonic because there was no one available to do small little stories, so he just did it himself because he had good enough comic art. There's also the claim that Ken owns every Archie and American Sonic character ever, and that's also very much untrue. Like I said, Ken had been an on-again, off-again main writer for the book, and while he did contribute to a decent number of characters such as Anti-Sonic/Scourge, Elias Acorn, and a ton of echidnas, he obviously didn't make everyone. Even echidna characters such as Aethar and Dr. Finitivius he hasn't claimed because he knows he didn't make them. Ken has made a detailed list of characters and concepts that he created and claims ownership of, which I'll link in the description for you to check out yourself. I've seen it get bad enough that people say that Ken owns the Freedom Fighters and even characters from the Archie Sonic reboot, and that's why we haven't seen them in anything new, but no, they haven't shown up because Sega doesn't want to use them, not because of Ken. As for other Archie originals not showing up in the reboot, that was due to a fear that other creatives might try at a lawsuit, such as Scott Fulop with fucking Mammoth Mogul and the Destructix. So it was just better to start from scratch to avoid more legal troubles. But what about when he does try to sue over stuff he didn't create, like Sonic Chronicles with the Nocturnus clan? You can argue whether or not Ken should have sued, but when you look at the Nocturnus clan and the Dark Legion side by side, there are some vague similarities, and it's pretty clear the team behind this game took to the Archie comics for some inspiration. But what about when Ken goes on Twitter to announce that Sega or the movies have stolen his ideas once again, such as IDW characters Rough and Tumble being parodies of Jeffrey St. John or the movies supposedly using Enerjack? I think this might be a mix of one or two things. 1. Fans of Ken's approach him and say that something vaguely similar with an idea of his is being used in the current Sonic series. 2. Someone is just looking to get a rise out of Ken, so they tell him that his ideas are being stolen, so he'll publicly go on Twitter to announce it and make himself look like a clown. It might be both of these, it might be none of these are just some theories I have. I foolishly said in my How to Read Archie Sonic video that it's absurd to think that Ken could have written everything in Archie Sonic, forgetting that Ian Flynn had also been writing Sonic, Sonic Universe, and Mega Man at the same time, along with various other comic creators such as Stan Lee or Robert Kirkman. But my point about comics being a collaborative medium is something I'll stand on. I think it's a bit sad how people completely ignore the contributions to Archie Sonic made by the ginormous group of creatives who also worked on the book just to talk about Ken and his shenanigans, even if it's to criticize it. I think this one should be pretty obvious to most people, but if it's not, then sorry to have to break your heart like this. Archie Sonic is not canon to the mainline Sonic series, aka the video games. The backstory and setting of Archie Sonic are simply too different to mesh together with that of the world of the games, with a version of Sonic who is a child soldier fighting a decade-long war against a horrible monster with a network of soldiers in claimed territory, just not being able to also be an adventure-loving free spirit who fights against a silly Eggman who tries to conquer the world. Even when Archie is adapting the video games, things go very differently in this universe, such as the SA2 adaptation where Knuckles and Tails are both absent, so it's just Sonic, Shadow, Rouge, and Eggman, or a version of Sonic Adventure where Chaos is stored in a black emerald instead of the Master Emerald, and Gamma survives at the end where he would go on to die at the hands of Omega, or Metal Sonic Troopers who coincidentally look like Neo Metal Sonic, or a meeting between Sonic and Blaze where she's kidnapped by SWAT bots and the two fight in an Eggman base, or Black Doom being busy fighting an alien race so the events of Shadow the Hedgehog don't happen, or a Sonic Riders adaptation where Jet is hired by Eggman and the Babylon Rogues fight Team Sonic in a forest, or... you see what I mean? Even in the reboot continuity, which takes much heavier influences from the games, things still aren't one-to-one. Snively is present during the events of Sonic 1 through 3K, Sonic Unleashed is turned into a whole saga where Sonic is with the Freedom Fighters and they help out by traveling to parts of the world, with Sonic the Fighters happening inside of that. Do you remember Coconuts from Adventures of Sonic piloting the stupid boss in Sonic 2 8-bit? I sure don't. I've seen some people say that Archie Sonic is canon in the sense that it's its own universe inside of a wider Sonic multiverse, but guys, that's not what canon means. Also, people using the everything is canon line from Sonic Twitter, when that was obviously said as a joke comment and wasn't meant to be taken super literally. Just because Archie Sonic isn't canon, that doesn't mean it's worthless or anything. It's still an extremely fun, all-ages adventure comic with colorful characters and storylines. You should read it just because of that. It's okay for stuff to be non-canon. It's not the end of the world, and just because something isn't a part of a shared universe doesn't mean it should be thrown out. Following the infamous lawsuit between Archie Comics and Ken Penders, it was decided that the comic would be rebooted to scrub itself of much of its comic history, creating a new world for Sonic and Co. to explore, though still using some elements of the old world. But which issue did this happen in, and what's a Genesis Wave? A Genesis Wave is the result of a person using a Chaos Emerald to rewrite reality to whatever the user wishes. With all 7 Chaos Emeralds, this results in a Super Genesis Wave, allowing the user to change all of reality rather than just bits and pieces. Eggman used the Genesis Wave in issue 2 225 to rewrite the universe into a world similar to that of the classic Sega games, with Super Sonic using his own Super Genesis wave to set everything back to normal in issue 229. Another Genesis wave would be used at the beginning of the Sonic and Mega Man crossover, bringing the two together in a world where many of the events from the video games had happened. At the very end, in issue 251, Sonic would use Chaos Control to restore Mega Man's world to that of the Archie comics continuity, meaning that world had been brought back to normal. Sonic would try the same thing again on his universe, only for Eggman to butt in and mess the whole thing up, resulting in a new universe in issue 252. This one is the one that caused the reboot to happen, not the one from issue 225 or 229. This one mostly finds its footing from the infamous House of Cards storyline, where Sonic repeatedly acts dismissive to Tails after the Fox's father had been thrown in jail for attempting a revolution against Elias Acorn and the Acorn family. Sonic at one point says this to Tails' parents, leading to a fight between Sonic and Tails, where Tails vents to Sonic about all the ways the hedgehog messed with him before Sonic apologizes for everything the two make up. This isn't a good storyline in my opinion, and I think it's more than fair to the people criticize Sonic's characterization in the storyline for being such a jerk, but this isn't what he acts like normally. Archie Sonic is not some jerk who constantly bashes on his friends in comedically mean-spirited fashion. Archie Sonic actually loves all of his friends and family and has respect for all of them. He meets Tails on the day of his birth and says they're gonna be best friends. He manages to beat the mind control of gods when he's forced to fight against Tails. He helps Antoine win the favor of his father when Antoine's dad pays more attention to Sonic. He feels so guilty over the events of Mecha Madness that he asks Sally to just let him die after being roboticized and nearly destroying that whole village. He chooses to sacrifice himself against the Zorda's quantum dial, saving the world. Getting violent with Silver when Antoine gets accused of being a traitor, feeling intensely guilty over his teasing of Tommy Turtle and Antoine, sticking up for Monkey Kong, and like a bunch of other moments where he's a pretty nice guy. If you don't like House of Cards, that's perfectly fine. I don't like it either, but I think it's a bit silly to disregard a character for a 2-issue bad storyline in a near 400-issue comic series. Ian Flynn was already building House of Cards on a very rocky foundation left by Ken Penders, and while I'm sure he could have handled it with much more grace, I'm not sure if it was ever going to turn out 100% satisfying. Sometimes comic stories are just bad, and sometimes your favorite characters are going to do stupid things. You just need to be able to move on from those moments and enjoy what you got. Heck, House of Cards is actually sandwiched between two stories where Sonic cares immensely about his friends, receiving his worst beating yet at the hands of Eggman and getting back up immediately to rescue his friends and family from Eggman's egg grapes, and another one where he has the choice to instantly destroy and Enerjack possessed Knuckles, but throws that idea away because he's not going to kill one of his best buds. Archie Sonic is not a jerk. He's just kind of written goofy sometimes, like most ongoing comic characters. I myself don't see the appeal in power scaling characters. I've never judged media based on how much a character can bench or how fast a character can run because I don't find that sort of stuff necessary to enjoy fiction. I also understand that it's a big reason why Archie Sonic is kind of popular in online spaces because he's been said to be universal or multiversal or whatever terms people use to describe super powerful characters. I've never kept track with it. I couldn't tell you how fast Archie Sonic is other than he's just really, really fast because that's never been my source of enjoyment with the book. I will say I do find some of it to be a tad exaggerated. Archie Sonic is not this unstoppable god who turns his enemies into ash just by blowing on them. He gets beat up and loses fights quite a lot in the comic via getting knocked on the head by sports equipment, Eggman's egg beater battlesuit destroying Sonic, and like dozens of other counts where he's clearly not invincible. The reason he can take so much abuse is because of the literal billions of power rings he's absorbed during his life, and the in-universe theory that some higher power just favors Sonic and allows him to snag a victory in dire situations. Often at times, people also use the gag-era short stories or editor's notes to prop up some of his insane feats, and the canonicity on some of these is a little sketchy. I get at the end of the day it's just people having fun with numbers and scientific terms, and maybe I'm being a bit of a dork with this talking point, but oh well. So there you have it, a little list of misconceptions that should hopefully close a few ongoing topics when it comes to Archie Sonic. I think I got most of the big ones out of the way, but let me know in the comments if there are some misconceptions that I should have covered in this video. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.